Anchored to the Wind, a frontier family saga. These aren't legends. They were my family. These are their stories. They crossed frontiers, survived wars, and helped build the place we call home. The first gray light of dawn drifted quietly over the eastern ridges, turning the morning mist into ribbons of silver that clung to the hollows below that crisp autumn of 1860. Palestine Horton stood in her worn homespun dress, brushing against the tall, whispering grass as she looked across the valley. The last stars were fading, and the first rays of sunlight caught the tops of the towering longleaf pines until their needles glowed like threads of gold. She breathed deeply. The mountain always smelled different before sunrise. There was the sharp sweetness of pine resin warming beneath yesterday's sun, the rich scent of damp earth turned dark by the night's dew, and the faint curl of oak smoke drifting from the stone chimney behind her. This was home. Beyond the split-rail fence, Sand Mountain rolled away in endless folds of oak, chestnut, and towering pine. In spring, the dogwoods floated like white clouds among the dark timber. By summer, the woods hummed with cicadas so loudly that silence itself seemed forgotten. Now it's fall, and golden leaves have begun to gently flutter from the trees. Deer moved like ghosts through the underbrush, and wild turkeys scratched beneath towering hickories. Every breeze carried the smell of wildflowers, cedar, and fresh creek water tumbling over smooth stones. To strangers it might have seemed lonely, but to Palestine Horton it was alive. She knew where the sweetest blackberries ripened first. She knew where the foxes denned their young. She knew where the wild mint covered the creek banks so thickly that one careless step would release its cool fragrance into the morning air. The mountain spoke. The lonely call of a whippoorwill meant evening was close. The sharp bark of a fox after midnight usually meant rain. A sudden silence among the birds meant that somewhere in the timber a hawk, or perhaps a bobcat, had begun to hunt. Her father often said that if a person listened long enough, the mountain would tell them everything they needed to know. Palestine believed him. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Her mother, Betsy, stepped onto the porch, carrying a wooden bucket, her auburn hair pinned neatly up. Though years of hard work had roughened her hands, there was a gentleness about her that seemed untouched by the hardships of mountain life. Betsy knelt among the neat rows of herbs, brushing loose earth around a cluster of mint whose fragrance rose sweetly in the warming air. "Morning, child," she said without looking up. "Morning, Mama." Palestine dropped beside her, gathering weeds into her apron. For several minutes neither spoke. They never needed to. The gentle scratch of the hoe against the soil, the buzz of honeybees drifting between blossoms, and the rustle of the corn leaves in the nearby field filled the silence with the music of ordinary life. Betsy finally broke the quiet. "See these?" She lifted a handful of chamomile blossoms. They looked delicate enough for decoration, but the Lord gave them purpose. They'll calm a restless child better than many things a doctor might carry. Palestine smiled. "I know." Betsy laughed softly. "I reckon you do." She reached for another plant. "This is horehound." "For coughs." "And this?" "Yarrow." "What for?" Palestine hesitated. I don't rightly remember." Betsy smiled with patient eyes. It helps stop bleeding. She laid the feathery leaves into Palestine's hand. The Lord is not the author of sickness, but He is the provider of some ways of healing, some hidden in these very plants around us. Most folks walk right past them every day without ever seeing what He's provided. Palestine turned the leaves over in her fingers. She studied every tiny vein. She wasn't merely memorizing. She wanted to understand. Your pa's already at the forge. Palestine smiled. Just beyond the garden, rhythmic ringing echoed from Preston Horton's blacksmith shop. The sound rolled through the trees like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Preston Horton had inherited the trade of blacksmith and gunsmith from his father. Iron yielded beneath his hammer with the quiet determination that marked the man himself. When the morning's work in the garden was finished, Palestine wandered toward the forge. Heat poured through the door. Inside, sparks burst like tiny stars each time Preston's hammer struck glowing iron. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, little dove." He had called her that since she could walk. "You watchin' or helpin' today?" "I'm watchin' first." He chuckled. "Watchin's how a body learns." Palestine loved the forge. She loved the smell of coal smoke, the hiss of the hot iron meeting the water, the careful way her father shaped stubborn metal into something useful. There were beauty in honest work. Around the walls hung horseshoes, wagon hardware, hand-forged hinges, rifle barrels waiting to be fitted, and hunting knives polished until they reflected the firelight. Outside leaned a wagon wheel, waiting for a new iron rim. Few men in 3 counties could match Preston's craftsmanship, yet for all his skill, he preferred the quiet company of his family to the praise from neighbors. When work slowed, he'd often disappear into the woods with his rifle, returning before sunset with a wild turkey across his shoulder or a venison slung over his saddle. Their smokehouse was seldom empty. Yet there was another side of him few people ever saw. Some evenings, after the supper dishes had been washed and the younger children had drifted to sleep, Preston would unfold scraps of paper from a small wooden box. His great work-worn hands, blackened by soot and iron, suddenly became gentle. With charcoal he drew what he had seen that day: a red fox slipping between cedar trees, a hawk riding a warm current above the valley, a doe standing ankle-deep in morning mist. Palestine loved those evenings. She would sit beside him without speaking, watching life slowly appear beneath his hand. "God paints it first," Preston would say quietly. "I only try to remember." Those words stayed with her, not because they were about drawing, but because they were about seeing, really seeing. By afternoon, the forge welcomed visitors. Neighbors stopped to sharpen their plows or mend broken tools. They talked of crops, and they laughed about the weather. They spoke about livestock and the road conditions. But lately, the conversation lingered on something else. Not loudly, not angrily, just enough to change the air. One man removed his hat and lowered his voice. "They say more folks down towards Tennessee are arguing over the slavery question." Another answered, "Ain't just Tennessee anymore." Someone glanced toward Preston. "What do you think?" Preston laid his hammer down before speaking. I think men ought to answer to their own conscience before they answer to any crowd. Preston believed slavery was wrong, though he rarely said so outside his own cabin. Palestine had heard enough whispered conversations after dark to understand why. Those whispers had said some opinions could cost a man more than friends. In the forge, no one replied immediately. The conversation drifted back to horses and corn prices, but Palestine noticed something she had never noticed before. The laughter did not return. The following Sunday, the Horton family hitched the wagon before sunrise. Church stood several miles away beneath the towering oak trees, its whitewashed walls weathered by years of mountain winds. After the church service, families gathered to have a harvest meal together. Families greeted one another. Children chased one another through the fallen leaves. Women compared gardens and exchanged preserves. Men gathered in quiet circles talking about the harvest. The smell of fried chicken, fresh biscuits wrapped in flour sack towels, preserves, and apple pies drifted through the Alabama air. Somewhere beneath it all lingered the familiar scent of leather saddles, horses, wood smoke, and the rich earth that still clung to everyone's boots. Palestine helped Betsy carry 2 heavy baskets from the wagon. "Set those over by Sister Collins," Betsy said. "She'll see everything gets put together." "Yes, Mama." Palestine smoothed her homespun dress before tucking a loose strand of chestnut hair back into her braid. She had grown several inches that summer. Her skirts no longer brushed the ground the way they once had, and lately Betsy had begun insisting she wear her hair pinned more neatly instead of letting it fall loose down her back. "You're becoming a young lady," her mother often reminded her. The word still felt strange. She wasn't sure when childhood had begun slipping away. "Palestine!" Palestine turned to see who called. Her sister, Alabama, laughed as she hurried towards her. "Come help us gather the last of the flowers." Several girls were weaving crowns from mountain laurel and wild daisies growing along the edge of the woods. Palestine knelt among them, her fingers automatically choosing the strongest stems. She had nearly finished her little wreath when laughter erupted nearby. Not childish laughter, young men's laughter. She glanced up. A group of boys, no, young men. She realized with surprise they were no longer boys at all. One stood slightly apart from the others, holding the reins of 2 horses while listening more than talking. William Anderson Jones. She had known him since before either of them could remember. He was 2 years older than her. He was taller now, broad through the shoulders from years of farm work. His sandy hair curled slightly where it escaped beneath his hat. He had clear blue eyes that always seemed to notice more than he said. When he smiled at something another fellow had said, a deep crease appeared beside one cheek. He looked different. Not different because he had changed overnight, different because she had never really looked before. He had always just been one of the neighbors, one more familiar face among many. Yet this morning, something seemed different. As if sensing someone watching, William glanced across the churchyard. For the briefest moment, their eyes met. Palestine immediately lowered her gaze to the flowers in her lap. Heat rushed into her cheeks. Mercy, Alabama whispered beside her. What? You turned red as a Juneberry. I did not. You surely did. Alabama grinned mischievously. I believe Will Jones has finally discovered you're no longer a little girl. Palestine gave her sister a gentle shove. Hush. I'm only saying what everyone else can already see. No one sees anything. Oh, I think one person does. Palestine concentrated very hard on weaving the stems together. The flowers suddenly required all of her attention. Across the yard, William adjusted the saddle blanket on one of the horses, though it needed no adjusting at all. His older cousin nudged him with an elbow. You planning to wear a hole in that saddle? William shrugged. No. His cousin followed his gaze toward the young women beneath the oak. I reckon you're looking at Preston Horton's daughter. William said nothing. His cousin smiled knowingly. She isn't 12 anymore. No, William answered quietly. No, she isn't. Betsy handed Palestine a woven basket. Palestine slipped the basket over her arm. The yarrow's blooming, Betsy said. Please bring a little of that. How much? Betsy smiled the same smile she always wore when one of her children asked a question that deserved more than an answer. As much as a mountain is willing to spare. Palestine laughed softly. You always say that. Because it's true. Palestine wandered toward the edge of the churchyard, where wild yarrow grew along an old split-rail fence. She knelt to examine the leaves. Nearby, a cluster of tiny white flowers caught her eye. Their leaves were unlike anything she remembered seeing. She reached towards them. Leave those. A gentle voice spoke behind her. A voice she didn't know. Palestine turned. They're not dangerous. An older black woman stood beneath the shade of a great oak. A woven basket rested on one arm. Her silver-threaded hair was tucked beneath a faded bonnet. Her hands were worn by years of work. Her eyes, however, held uncommon warmth and wisdom. She rubbed one of the leaves gently between her fingers before holding it beneath Palestine's nose. It carried a sharp, peppery scent. Before you gather a plant, she said softly, you should know its story. Palestine looked down at the tiny blossoms. Their story? The woman nodded. Every plant has one. You know the difference between pretty plants and useful ones. I've watched you for some time now, she said with a quiet smile. She nodded toward the yarrow in Palestine's hand. You gather medicine. Palestine felt suddenly shy. I like learning what the Lord made. The woman smiled a little wider. So do I. She extended her hand. My name's Hester. Palestine placed her small hand into hers. I'm Palestine. For reasons neither of them yet understood, it would become one of the most important meetings of Palestine Horton's life. Until our next episode, may the Lord carry us onward.